How you guys doing this week?
Doing well.
Fantastic.
Keeping busy. Wall-to-wall meetings. That's actually not good.
Let me ask you this, Matt Ray and Brandon. This is one of Brandon's favorite topics. I signed up for a new service today called Magneto, I think, not to be confused with, Magneto, as it were. And the guy who can move.
I saw that too
metal.
today. Not bad.
Yeah, and it's like yet another calendaring service that works with Exchange and Google Apps, and I apparently someone in the calendaring space, there was the bright innovation of, if you put an address in there, we should tell you the drive time it will take from your home or office, which does seem handy, right? Like, that's interesting. But I've been thinking recently, I think I could solve a lot of my problems, speaking of back-to-back meetings, if there was some little macro, if that's a thing, that every time a meeting got added, it would add a 30-minute block on the end of that meeting. You know what I mean? Like, just because you don't want to have back-to-back meetings, that never works, right, Matt Ray? Like, you need some buffers. You're always running over, and you're like, oh, sorry, I'm late. My other meeting was running over, right? And that doesn't seem productive. And,
actually, but, I mean, don't tell anyone.
Uh-huh.
Am I muted?
No, you're still there. But if you indeed don't want to
don't tell anyone,
lip readers,
but
you should yourself.
God dang it. Stupid headsets.
Sorry, I've been checking my calendar here, trying to arrange some 30-minute time slots afterwards.
Hello.
What were you telling people, Matt Ray? You wanted to tell them something that you don't want them to tell anyone else. So how about you, Brandon? How do you manage your calendar?
Well, I certainly do try to put in...
Well, I figure if they're listening to the show, they're probably not going to tell anybody.
We've got an excellent time delay going here. Fantastic. So who wants to go first?
I was going to say, Cote, the magic to all of this, right, is to not have people schedule meetings. So, like, as all technology, it's not about adding time. It's about making the cost to schedule a meeting with you more difficult than someone at least wants to do within like 5 seconons, right? That's the key. That's the key that you need to fix.
Work? Like, can you arrange your workflow such that you don't need to have that many meetings?
Well, I think you talked about it, right? You talked about last week around, like, I think you somehow have mastered your the workflow of doing less email.
Yeah.
Somehow people, you have to train people around, either like, hey, I think the other thing too is just to make all your meetings 30 minutes, right? Just by default 30 minutes. That gives you like a 30-minute buffer. Between your next one. It's like, hey, very few things should take longer than 30 minutes.
That's true. I should try that out more. 30-minute meetings. That's good. Anyways, I re-invited Matt Ray. He seemed to be in some sort of space-time continuum loop. It's very tragic.
You see what happens is he didn't schedule enough time for this podcast, and that's why he's having difficulty with his meeting.
And have you found any nirvanic calendaring scheduling tools, Brandon? Like, I mean, this is always like one of your favorite topics.
It's funny. This brings up like a different topic. I'm going to take this a different direction, but you know how like certain things you think to yourself, they of course are built. These products should exist as like SaaS solutions, right? So like the obvious one is no one should use Microsoft Document or Microsoft Word when creating a document for when you're collaborating on, right? You just use Google Doc or something else. Like, never do that. But and slowly that's taking shape. And then I was thinking about this, and calendaring is another good example. Every calendaring system should be delivered as a SaaS and should be really easy to integrate with everybody else.
Yes.
And then recently I saw like there's like identity management, the whole idea of like taking all these different user accounts and linking them all to all these different systems. Again, like a perfect SaaS solution. But I noticed some guys here in Austin simplified, and I guess they sold this thing off to RSA, and it didn't go that well. I guess it was kind of a quick sale, and it's like, and I think about it's like, is the time just not right? Like, is the moment of calendaring, like email has kind of gotten there with Google Mail or Gmail and all that. Most small companies today always start with Google Docs and Gmail.
Mm-hmm.
So like the
Yeah.
time has come for that, right? But the time has not come for like a global calendaring system. Like it just, I don't, and like why? Like why has that not happened? Like anyone that interviewed people and like did true market validation would have a bunch of people that are frustrated because they can't schedule meetings with other people. But like it will never get implemented. I don't know. I always just feel like all the business professors who write about this, it's like, I don't know, like the problem is definitely there, but like what has to happen? Just like identity management, just like all these things, like what has to happen for real penetration
Well,
of those solutions?
the fact that it's free now makes it hard to undercut, right? I mean, you get so much free calendaring with like, Google calendaring and hosted Exchange or Office 365. It's like you're already bundled into stuff that is cheap.
Yeah.
How do you carve out new territory in free? Because
Yeah.
you can race to zero, but once you're there, do you just kill? Does that end up is that what you're stuck with?
Well, I think you're right though, because I think like the other way I think of this too is like an open source. Like a lot of times people complain about an open source product, and again, like I think a lot of times it gets used because it's free, and it's kind of the same argument. It's like free becomes the enemy of really like good or even like useful. It's like yes, every calendaring system out there is free. No one's going to pay for anything. Therefore, they all suck, and they will never integrate with each other. You know what I mean? It's like it's just a spiral. It's just a spiral into, and there's like a number of open source products that are like decent but could be great, but no one will pay for them, so they always are just decent. They're never great. So.
Nagios.
I mean, Nagios is a great example. Like Nagios is like you cannot kill Nagios,
Jenkins.
and everyone complains about it. I mean, like I can't go one day without hearing someone complain about Nagios. And
Right,
I'm like,
right.
the reason is. And then then you ask the operations guy like just for a little bit of money, and it's like whoa, I'm gonna use my Nagios, so.
Yeah. The tyranny of just good enough.
I don't even think it's good enough. Calendaring is not good enough. Who is like happy with calendaring? I think no, I'm not happy at all. Like
No.
who doesn't have like a family calendar, like a personal calendar, a work calendar, one on your iPhone, one on your Android device, one on your it's like and none of them really sync. You never know where you're supposed to be.
I have 14 calendars, and I currently have 3 copies of a daily meeting that I can't delete for the life of me. Every time I delete it, it sends out a notice to everyone that I deleted it, and someone accepts it, and I get 4.
Yeah. Well, that's like the Exchange. I think Exchange has like permanently added that feature. There were meetings when I used to work at companies with Exchange, like they would be there for years. Like you could not delete them no matter what you did.
Yeah.
So.
No,
it's never gonna get fixed.
I think you've identified a structural problem in fixing it. Is there's no money in it, right? Like it's there's no easy money in it versus other opportunities you might have. Because definitely like, my current theory is that the problem is not so much interfacing with the external world. Because there's lots of services that will let you like share your free busy calendar and even do scheduling things, but it's like sharing with your internal people that always seems to be a problem. And I think for me that always resolves around the fact that metaphorically speaking, across the firewall, it's very rarely like Exchange talking to Exchange or Google Apps talking to Google Apps. Like these systems, they just don't work with each other across organizations, and it's really bizarre. And then to the point that we're making here, it's not like anyone's waiting in line with fistfuls of cash to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Which becomes the issue. Now that said, I forget if I told this anecdote here, but I had a funny thing recently where like I used Doodle because I don't know, because why not, right? And I actually pay for it, I think, whatever it is a month to get the premium thing, which means it'll integrate with Exchange and all this other nonsense. And I had one person who just couldn't figure out how to use it, like an external person, and I didn't really know. It's like after a while I just gave up and reverted to the old listing available times in email. But it's just kind of ridiculous. Like I don't know, but yeah, it's weird that it's not like that every email calendar system doesn't at the very least by default have a public URL you can go to see someone's free availability, and how that's not just like normal, right? I mean, that's like step one, if you will.
Sounds like a business plan right here. We got
Yeah,
calendar
yeah.
plus, and we'll have to not be paid for it. And it'll be Doodle, and
Doodle.
and an automatic calendar compressor, because you were saying you don't want meetings back to back, but I
Yep.
want for every 30 minutes of meeting I get 30 minutes of work.
Exactly.
So cram my day with like 8 back-to-back meetings if I get a big chunk of free time at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's but to Brandon's, like, he kind of touched positivity there briefly before we got down in the mire and the troughs of muck here. But it is like I think I have learned a few practices to survive in the calendaring world. Like I got out of the context of my previous employer, Dell, where the calendaring anti-pattern there was one could not determine one's own fate, or as people often say at big companies, I don't control my calendar. So you were just kind of screwed, right? There's nothing around that. But at least in my current role, with extremely rare exception, that's typically always valid. Like there's an all hands meeting or whatever, right? Like there's not really. I can pretty much control my calendar, and it's mostly just my problem if something screws up. But it would be cool to have some little rules to execute. But calendars, fascinating. Yeah. It is like I mean, to the point that Brandon was making earlier, like it's one of those things that, like, at a gut level you figure it just takes up so much of your time and mental effort that it would optimize your life so much to fix, but it doesn't seem to get fixed. I don't know what to do about it. Maybe iCloud will fix it.
There's maybe some hope though, Cote, because I know we were going to talk a little bit about this Apple IBM, big announcement, right? And so at a broad level, like one way to think, like to be real optimistic, is like clearly Apple has very good consumer experiences, and people generally like their products because of that. And it's like, can IBM be like an entree or an entrance for bringing this like Apple experience into the enterprise, right? So instead of going the other way, where it's like always the enterprise products are kind of crappy and then they try to become consumerish, is to actually bring consumer-oriented products in through like a well-established business channel, being IBM.
Yeah.
So it's like, instead of like, imagine if your company could build a really good iPhone app or mobile app for the Apple platform that you would actually want it to use, versus like managing your benefits or your expense reports inside any large company is usually like a very painful, ugly thing. And it's like, so I like that idea of, hey, maybe this Apple IBM thing is a sign of like, the enterprise needs to suck in these consumer companies, but through like well-established channels.
Yeah, I think that's
or does
definitely.
IBM just port Lotus Notes, the same experience, right onto iOS?
Well, I agree. That's total failure, right? Whereas if there was some quote about how like Lotus Notes was like an offense to the human race or something. I don't know. Somebody like made some crazy. But you're right. I think that's what happens today, is like enterprises sort of get it and they just totally destroy it. But I think if you think about like the sales and support angle, which is what I kind of took from the IBM Apple thing, was that they were going to kind of take on sales support more in a way that corporations find friendly.
Yeah.
And we're going to kind of leave the platform alone. But clearly, it's like when the carriers used to like take the operating system of the phones and then modify them and make them all crappy.
Right.
Then it's like, oh, it's total failure.
Yeah, and Apple won't let that, but hopefully they have some taste when they port stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to a industry analyst conference they had on this, which is always nice to see how people intone things and see the questions my fellow analysts have. I don't know if you guys have ever heard like an IBM industry analyst teleconference, but it's hilarious. There's two types of analysts in the Q&A period. There's one type who asks like total asshole questions. Like one guy was like, "So why isn't Apple on this call?" And it's just like, like, thanks for making my time productive. And then there's the other type who are like, "Congratulations, this is a great announcement." And then they ask a question, but it's just inevitably.
That's all I have. No question. Congratulations.
Yeah, they usually ask pretty good questions, but it is. And I guess there's a third type, me, who never asks anything, because it's just sort of like, I don't know why. because I'm bashful like the dopey elf or dwarf. Anyways,
The bashful analyst.
anyways, like I think there, if I remember, there's kind of like three components to it essentially, which is and I'm recasting this all in my own way of putting it. One is like, hey, we're best buddies, right? And it's a typical like it can be taken as one of those vacuous partnership things. Like Microsoft used to have announcements like this all the time, where like we're going to have a partnership with someone, and then you'd never really hear about it again. Lots of companies do this, but more of what it is the IBM guys kept saying it was like an exclusive worldwide relationship and contract for all sorts of things. And so, for example, and I think you guys are talking about this, one of the things it has is basically you can go to IBM, who will be your reseller and the equivalent of a VAR or a value-added reseller on top of iPhone stuff, and you can just buy from them, if you will. And we have a 451 report that I didn't write, but I'll put a link to it. And it did point out that while obviously there's tons of iOS device stuff in corporations, there's not that many 10,000 plus deployments out there of units deployed in those sort of managed in those quantities, which I think makes sense for access to the getting access to the IBM channel to sell more iPhones angle. And then the other part that like was somewhat of the vaguest, but a lot more specific than you would usually see from a vacuous partner announcement, was basically that there's like 100+ industry-specific applications that IBM is custom writing for the iOS ecosystem, starting to be available in this fall and next year. And they said this was across like this is where all the enterprise speak stuff comes into play, and I'm looking forward for all the consumer Apple people like wading through it and like blowing their head off over like solution speak and things like that. But like in banking and insurance, telco, retail, government, travel/transportation, and healthcare, sectors of industry that Apple people love to talk about and operate in.
So will IBM have its own application store, or is it
That's a good question.
Special code to
get on the call to ask that. Does this mean there will be an app store or a marketplace? I think the implication is like a yes with pages of qualification and stuff. But the what IBM was intoning is basically like we when it comes to apps, right? Having to put it another way to build off what you're saying, what we're not talking about is porting notes to the iPhone. Right? Instead, what we're talking about is is actually writing like native apps like for iOS for all these business applications, and more importantly for lots of IBM revenue, hooking that very relative to the time it takes, money it takes to do it, and like the overall component, that little slice of the front end into the gigantic like briar patch of the enterprise back end and all of the middleware and traditional IBM stuff that they do, right? Which makes sense. It's fine. It's and something like this. It's sort of like a we're building a fleet of Cyberponies that are going to be awesome, and then so you're like, that's awesome. I love Cyberponies. Tell me when you got them. Right?
Yeah.
And it'll just be the proof will be once the ponies are out of the stables and seeing what they look like. But and then the final thing I'll insert in before I and then there's mobile device management. Like IBM bought this little relatively little company called FiberLink that just manages your mobile devices. I don't really know what that means, so I'm not going to talk about it much. But you got to manage that crap, and then also like the sort of core platform for building on top of this is their like Blue Mix platform as a service middleware roundup of stuff, and that's nice. So everything looks genuine on paper. It's not just like a bunch of pictures of like the two hands shaking each other and lots of talk about like stuff is going to happen in the wonderful future, if you will, like you would usually hear. Now, finally, the other thing that I think was like maybe was a bit of a I don't know, if you wanted to like bemoan something, is IBM sort of like gratuitously always has to talk about analytics and big data, and it's kind of like, sure, that's a thing. But I think the amount and degree to which they talk about it, like it'd be easy to over-rotate on as like that being a big deal versus just like doing what you would expect you would be doing with analytics and data in a space, which is usually the safer way to translate, like we're doing big data and analytics, which is like So you know on a 24-hour period what the current inventory in stores are, and you distribute that to people every day? Yes.
Big
So
data.
like
It's
I,
huge.
I mean, it's a little more than that, but I think, I mean, and I'm only reacting to this because I've seen a lot of people be like, what does that mean, big data? Like, what are they, is Apple going to use like Watson to analyze who's using iPhones or some nonsense? But what it really means is that anecdotally, if you look across businesses globally, they're lucky if they can write an Excel macro, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that they're doing any sort of intermediate level analytics is like makes people's heads blow up. And so that's
Yeah.
the kind of thing that you can kind of bring to them that's extremely useful to
Yeah.
give them something.
So that's not big data though. That's medium data.
Yeah, that's right.
So my only snarky well, I've got lots of snarky comments, but at any point did IBM list their investment in the billions? Because it's not an IBM press release without that.
I don't think so. No, they did the other thing that IBM and other companies do is they're like, we have 5,000 people who do this, which is fine, right? Like it means they've got a big talent pool of people. Other companies wouldn't be able to make claims like that, but no, there was no multi-billion-dollar commitments as far as I could see.
You know where they could get a whole lot of mobile people? Microsoft.
Hey,
Hey,
that's almost a segue.
that is the segue there.
Yeah, no,
I went there.
it is a curious like mixture of news, right? Like in the meantime, IBM is laying off half of what it acquired from Nokia, right? Like, and the reason you overqualify that is like they only took the phone business from Nokia. They didn't take the telco equipment stuff, and I don't know if there's any vestigial like rubber boot manufacturing in Nokia anymore, but all they took was the phone business. So
yeah,
apparently from what I read, they're laying off half of those people, and in addition to some Microsoft people.
I think
And a 14% reduction, more than a decimation.
Yes, I think there was a third Nokia company that spun out. So I think there was like Microsoft took mobile, and then the network guys went somewhere, and then I think there's another one that does like map data.
Oh yeah, because didn't they buy like NavQuest or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, because
That's right.
I ran into some of those guys at a conference, and you know they were describing their stuff, and it's like, wow, it makes Google's stuff sound kind of lightweight. I mean, just because they're like, well, you know, the Google stuff is nice, but you know, we're doing real-time navigation for UPS or FedEx or those sorts of people who need like real-time data.
Yeah. No. To your point, it's we were joking about this with calendaring. It's one of those markets where it's like, check out what happens when you actually pay for the product.
Exactly. You know how awesome this could be?
like there's this pretty astounding functionality that they have when you have to fork over cash for it. Yeah, I was in Target the other day, as so often happens, and I noticed a sad little row of GPS devices, or shelf space of GPS devices. It kind of just evokes some fond memories, like that was a thing.
Well, yeah, I'm still long on my TomTom stock.
Yeah, but I think I talked with one of our local tech reporters about the IBM Apple thing yesterday, and like I think there's a lot of criticism of people being overly glowing about it, right? Which is fair, because it is like, as I was going over, you can look at it the angle of like there was really nothing announced, and per the two types of analysts on IBM calls, there was the type who was like, so what's different in the product from when you talked about it 2 quarters ago? Like seeing if there was an actual announcement, which is also another endearing analyst question to have. And yeah, I think it's true that there's not like a bunch of like monumental stuff, but it's as we three and others in the enterprise space know, it's basically like, well, previous to this we did nothing with those assholes. Now we love them.
So are there people who go back and they're like, they read the show notes from the analyst event, 6 months ago, and they're like, so when you said mobile, you were talking about today's announcement? They're like kind of,
oh yeah,
I get it. And then and so then they pay close attention today, and then in 6
Yep.
months they're like, so that means
Yeah, yeah. No, that happens all the time, and like there's I'm sure you guys are familiar with the fox versus hedgehog like metaphor, right? You're either broad or very deep and narrow, right?
yeah.
If you will, and I tend to be more of a fox, right? In more ways than one, but in
Silver
in 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 any ways, I tend to not go very deep on things, so I don't remember stuff like that really, except for a few things here and there that I have a sickness for. And but yeah, no, one famous case of that I remember witnessing was this is probably like in 2008. Like I was at an SAP conference, and James Governor, one of my former Red Monk bosses, colleagues, whatever, was there, and I forget the exact wording of it, but he totally nailed someone on that. It was not about cloud, but it was one of those. It was, and this happens too. It was one of those things where it's like, let me read to you a quote from 2003. Cloud is crap, and you just said cloud is the future. I'll sit down now, right? And, yeah, no, I mean stuff like that happens all the time, and it often comes from analysts who used to be like journalists, and they still have that. They still have that notion in their mind that their job is in part to expose this stuff like that, which could be the case.
But it seems like that antagonistic relationship. People like that. I mean, I guess.
Well, vendors
Maybe that
like
makes
it.
you a straight shooter as an analyst. They're like,
Yeah.
well, that Cote, he calls it like it is. So
Yeah,
when
yeah.
he
Well,
talks, we listen.
I mean, if there are, as always, when you tell someone, you point out that someone's baby or that they themselves are ugly, the person you're addressing does not like it, but everyone else seems to revel in it. So, like,
Yep, that's an ugly baby.
love that ugly baby. We should make a reality show out of it. Ugly babies. But yeah, I think if as an analyst, we go into a deep analyst rat hole thing here. But like, I mean, as an analyst, if your constituency are buyers or the public at large, then yeah, it's definitely like a thing you do to shoot down other people, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount of analysts, including not all of, but a material amount of my work that's basically like helping vendors out, telling people that they have ugly babies in private, and then suggesting ways that they might beautify their baby, right? And so for someone like me, I'm actually like giving away the milk for free if I'm telling someone that their baby is ugly in public. Like it doesn't really like benefit anything.
Yeah,
But do you think, Cote, this all comes back to like kind of the like underlying all this in so many ways is like the whole fallacy of the press release. It's like, you especially in enterprise software or large companies, it's like there's a need for like a short one-page document press release that's supposed to be written at a super high level that is usually
Yes.
dealing with very complicated topics that that to really understand what's going on really require either more explanation or require
Yeah.
you to know a lot about the domain. Kind of this IBM Apple thing, right? Today, it's like, okay, if the goal was today to get a lot of people to write about it, which I think they probably did, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people like reprinted it. It's like they had to keep it at such a high level that it had a lot of the bad adjectives that people hate, scalable, and then but the whole thing was like, listen, if I wanted to go into the detail or to really understand it all, would bore you and you won't write about it. And this is sort of like the ongoing things. Like people want these complicated things to be really simple. Like, and then somebody's like, well, why not like Apple? Where it's just like, well, Apple announces something that's usually easy to grasp. Like, hey, here's 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's called an iPad, right, or an iPod.
Yeah.
And you wish, like I'm the same way. I mean, I wish everything was like that, but in this enterprise, automation, Matt Ray, I know you can deal with it. It's like to really understand like why all these things, new releases are important. You got to understand why you need automation, and and then of course the press release is like, and then there's always like anytime I've authored, or I should never say authored, I've like contributed to many, and it's like there's like this war inside a company, and people are like, this doesn't go over the future and benefits. It doesn't say anything. And then the next thing is like, this is too long. And then the next thing is like, well, I don't think anyone's going to understand this. And then the cycle just goes around and around in circles.
Yeah.
I mean, we had, I won't name names. I had a conversation about like some wording going into a press release, and I was kind of like, people are going to make fun of this. And I was like, can't we just put like, here's the source on GitHub. That's the press release.
Yeah.
Couldn't it be that simple? But of course, that that helps nobody. That
Yeah,
doesn't tell the story or anything like that.
no, exactly, no, and that gets to what I was going to say is, I mean, I mean, to back away from the IBM Apple thing, which I'll get to, but generally for an announcement, the scale at which you're even thinking of doing a press release. I mean, a press release generally like is a lot of hassle and costs money and things like that, and unless you're just putting something on your blog post, right? Your blog post, blog holes, whatever. But
Tumblr.
it's generally something that's important, and you probably have like multiple audiences that have very different needs and reading styles and APIs, if you will, right? And generally, I think it's probably good to start with like at least 3 different mediums that you would do an announcement through any given press release, and I think people like, to use a big company reference, people like Microsoft tend to do this pretty well, actually. Like they kind of cover this gamut. And one of them is you have like a normal official press release that is almost like painfully written like a press release you would make fun of. Because, and I don't mean this to sound like some sort of negative, conceited or whatever thing, but like I actually like find a tremendous amount of value in press releases because like I know how to read them and I understand the language of it, and like I can do all of the reading between the lines of what happened and what it means and stuff like that, right? Like it's like I was saying, you see a partner announcement like this, and there's certain things that you can look out for to see if it's a vacuous partner relationship you'll never hear again, or if it's an actual like, we think it's very important that you realize that we're friends now, right? And that means what that implies, as we're kind of alluding to, is we're working on things and we will be announcing things in the future. And you can be that analyst Matt Ray was talking about, where like if a year from now we end up not doing anything, then yeah, you can kind of like say we're dumb, right? Because the expectation that's set here is essentially like there will be solid concrete things coming out that are like native iOS applications that are boring business enterprisey things. So anyways, and so I think press releases are handy for that, and they're also handy for people who like a little bit for like reporters who are also very well trained in like reading press releases, and they know what to do for them and extract it. And then there's a third form that's almost like the blog post, and even those are like, as I'm sure you guys have worked on a lot, contributed to, as Brandon said, are much debated and redlined and pinned out and everything. But this is an area where I think Microsoft is actually really good. Is they'll have from like senior-ish VP on below, like write the blog version of a press release that's in a lot more human voice, and it gives you a little bit of the history of things. And like 3 years ago, we started on this quest to do something, and then I had this phone call from someone, and it gives you a different approach to the same data. And then oftentimes what that leads to is kind of a secondary thing of like, and here's some links to sub-projects that are like very nerdy and explain things to you, right? Yeah. Like, and that's great, right? Because it kind of gives you like, especially as an analyst, I want to know the business pitch for something. Like, how does this fit into a business and what's it going to do regardless of the technology? And then I want to go validate that something's actually there with the technology, right? And so it gives me that thing. And then the third thing is basically just like verbal word of mouth and maybe even social Twitter stuff, where you kind of, and not very many people do this well, but you kind of just, whether you have calls with reporters or analysts or constituencies, and you just kind of sit down and, or a teleconference like IBM had around this Apple thing, and you more explain things, whether it's in a speech or whatever. And you get there's like an overlapping three-ring circus Venn diagram of what each of these things do, and there's plenty of overlap in the content, but you can get different types of content and signaling and data, if you will, from all 3 of those formats. In defense of press releases.
Well, it's funny, I was thinking it's a lot like, because I agree on the language of press releases, it's a lot like being a lawyer in contracts. Like, it's not like lawyers actually ever read the clauses. They just can almost like identify them like, oh yeah, this clause means this clause means that. You know what I mean? It's like shorthand, and I think you're right. If you deal with press releases a lot, right, there's almost like a formal like clause language that kind of lets you know like this is a joint partnership, or this is this press release was just for marketing, right? This was a momentum press release. This was a release where this is sort of you can kind of read between the lines and see what's going on. But if you do it a lot, and I think sometimes that's when people that haven't encountered them a lot, they read it and they're like, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, and to be fair, which is an odd way of prepending what's going to be a negative comment. To be fair, a lot of the tea leaf reading I do on press releases are negative things, right? Like for example, I'm sure your guys have never done this, but whenever I read a startup announcement that's like, we've had X percentage growth, right, that's in the triple digits, I'm always like, well, did they tell me the revenue or what it was growth from or growth to? Like, and if it's just like raw percentages, then like, great. Like, I don't know, but between like when I woke up this morning and went to bed, I had like 2,000 percentage intake of coffee. Like, I mean, like, growth without the finishing and ending signposts don't really mean that much. Now, over time, those metrics start to be good. Like quarter over quarter, even if all you have is a percentage, like they're interesting. But there's or for example, if you read a press release and they don't have a customer quote in there, right? Like a named customer quote, that's kind of a bad sign. Or on the alternative, it can be a great sign that if they have, if it's like littered with named customer quotes for like a 1.0 release, then that's a really good sign. Like, especially, I mean, it's really hard to get people to give you quotes, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, and I definitely deal with that a lot. I mean, that's like in my job, it's integrating our stuff with other people's software, and I get a lot of inbound requests. Hey, come work with us, and I usually have to like, say, well, show up with a customer, because then because if it's just software company talking to software company, we're both going to get bored. And so if they have a customer, at least we'll go down that marketing path of, oh, we'll do a blog, we'll do a press release, and that what you're looking for is going to be in there. There's going to be Joe from company X says I love that these vendors are working together.
Yeah. No, and the other thing with this type of announcement that can be, I mean, I don't want to put it in a bad way, but with an announcement that doesn't have products, right? There actually are offerings that you can buy in this, right? Like the support and reselling and things like that, right? But the other stuff was to crib an old Dave Attell joke, which I'll leave as an exercise for the listeners to look up themselves. To be continued. But anyways, like, I think the other thing to do with it, if you're bored, is to think about what this implies for other people, because it's not like Apple's going to go announce a partnership like this with Dell, HP, Oracle, SAP, and all these other entities, right? Or let alone Microsoft. So it's fun to think like, well, if those two people paired up, and hopefully they'll get those Cyberponies out one day. What does it mean for everyone who's left? Like, how's the is it musical cake? No, musical chairs. You win a cake. It's like now the game of musical chairs continues in kind of a weird way. So, it's like, that was what I was talking with the local reporter about, obviously, about like what it means for Dell, and it's interesting to think about, like, what's Oracle going to do, and HP and all these other people who are sort of equally big people like IBM, who feel the same need to do mobile stuff. And like, now they're not the worldwide exclusive partner with Apple, if you will. So, like I said, you can entertain yourself with that.
Not the first.
Yeah.
If there's any exclusivity here, there probably isn't, right? I mean,
and I guess that is one thing that would have been a good analyst question, is how long is this exclusivity going to last? Is it like, it's like the AT&T partnership, which was that like a 5-year term from 2007? I forget when Sprint came online or whatever, but there is like no partnership is infinite, despite the headquartered address of one of the partners. So it does, like, it must expire at some point, in which case renewals and other people can expand out. But yeah, I think it's exciting. It'll be fun to see like IBM become an applications company in the mobile era. That's the other like insidery jab to have, is IBM's always like, it's not a jab, it's friendly ribbing. But like IBM's always insisting that they're not an apps company, and then you look at companies they've acquired over the past 2 or 3 years, and you're like, I think you're an apps company. And now it's sort of like, now we're making hundreds of custom apps to deliver on iOS. Sounds like an apps company. So,
who's the Samsung? Who will if we assume Samsung sort of the Android, at least the biggest one, or I guess Google, like who do they partner with as their enterprise? Who's going to take Android and build all the Android apps for the enterprise?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's not that many. There's like, again, there's like HP, Oracle, SAP. There's not that many giant companies left anymore. There's services.
I mean, to your point about like thinking about a press release, who does it affect? It's like, okay, you have the guys at Google, you have the guys at Samsung, kind of thinking like, okay, how are we going to penetrate the enterprise? like they have done with IBM. And
Yeah.
if history shows anything, it's like they'll go out and try to do it with all of the rest of the guys, like everybody. Like they'll just say, yeah, it's
No,
that would be the natural response.
and that's the easy pattern recognition thing to foist up is the Microsoft model, right? Where your model is one of maximum promiscuity, right? Like all of the device, there's not a single device. It's like there's multiple devices in a single software, if you will, which that would be interesting. And then there's also like for some reason I study Chromebooks a lot. Like, to use Matt Ray's thing, don't tell anyone, but the only reason is so I can get free review units, which I don't really. No, and professionally it is a curiosity, but it's interesting to see like Google's strategy to get Chromebooks out there, right? And I don't know, depending on how you measure it, they have a margin of errors worth of like market share, which is to say somewhere between 1% and 5%. It's actually pretty big well, it's somewhere around 10 or less % in education, which makes sense because it's cheap. But like, I mean, the way they go about Chromebook stuff is, yeah, they have lots of device partners, and they almost have the fact that they're big in education kind of speaks to a little bit of what you're asking, Brandon. Is like their go-to-market approach is price-based, and it's just sort of like you need labs of stuff, so you should just buy these things. Like you're not really buying on a feature thing; you just need cheapness.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't know. I don't really have it thought out, but I think like if you want to like instead of looking at Android as itself as a way of figuring out how Android is the foil to this, it's also interesting to look at Chromebooks and see how they get sold out and sold out's the wrong word, but how they get brought to market and things like that.
I think Brandon and I are going to need review units.
Yay!
There we go. Now we're talking.
I do have my most recent one. I have this Pixel, if you will.
Oh,
See?
but that's the nice one.
It's probably going to cause me to have to send it back now.
Oh, wow, man. You even put the serial number there.
Yeah, oh, well, I don't know what that means. Does that mean I'm going to get hacked and lose my identity and blow up in an airplane or something? But it is
only
like
for Bitcoin, yeah.
But it is like, man, these are nice machines.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The monitor on it is awesome. And they're good machines. And if we didn't use Exchange, I would be using this all the time. Like if we were a Google app shop at 451, I'd probably be using that computer. But if you're not a Google app shop, it's pretty much DOA, right? Like you have to use email. You're like, hey, right over here.
I'll pontificate next week.
Yeah, it's a good machine. I like it. So speaking of, we should wrap up, but we touched on the Microsoft thing a little bit. Do you guys have any? Have you read through those Speaking of like corporate talk, I haven't actually read that memo that their CEO wrote, but there's been a lot of discussion about how it was vacuous. And,
yeah. I mean, it does kind of get to your point of everyone kind of pivoting to become an app company, to become because everybody wants to be IBM, right? I mean, that's like Dell, Cisco, Oracle, they all want to be IBM. They're like, we want to ditch our hardware and become a services company. And and IBM's kind of like, and we want to be an apps company, but not really. And and IBM and Microsoft is kind of like, the future is collaboration with apps.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things that it sounded like our traditional things you'd think about Microsoft were not were the focus. It wasn't. It wasn't Windows. It wasn't. Zune. It wasn't Xbox.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the more concrete the more. Have you seen The Concrete People? That sounds like a Doctor Who episode. But I think the more concrete thing that people want is like they want something like the fall. And I'm just making it up, but this is how I translate a lot of that jibber jabber from everyone. Is basically like, so we used to have desktop and web applications, and now we're going to have native phone applications. We got a lot of rewriting to do. And it's just like, so we need to make Office work on that, and there's going to be a bunch of emerging like back-end services and applications that come out in that way, like SQL Server and SharePoint are giant businesses that don't directly translate into this, but we didn't know about those in the early 90s, maybe SQL Server, but it's just sort of like things will emerge and you're going to need a stack to just rewrite all these applications onto a new platform and the resulting backend, and that's what we're gonna do, right? And then of course, it's like, well, what are you gonna do exactly? And it's like, if I knew exactly what we were gonna do, then you would know already, right?
Yeah.
Like we would be releasing it, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah. Then you're going to bring it up in a press release in 6 months. You know.
Exactly. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
is a bummer to lay off all those people. That always sucks.
Well, that's one way. I mean, the other way is like, working for a company based out of Seattle. They were like, anybody know anybody who's coming?
Yeah. That is a turn a frown upside down approach a lot of people. I've seen multiple people have is like, oh, there's going to be a startup renaissance in Finland, which would be delightful. They've got lovely saunas there. Just stay away from the licorice. You don't want that. If there's black
Not a
candy
fan.
in Finland, avoid it.
Send it back.
Everything else about it is great.
But in the end, like, isn't like the main question though with that whole press, all that things come out is like, basically, will Microsoft? I mean, I guess the question would be like this: is Microsoft really even going to be relevant in 5 years? And that's different from like, is it going to be around? Is it going to be making a lot of money?
Yeah.
It is going to be around. It's going to make a lot of money, and I think it's sort of. And I guess it's like whenever you read those things and all these quotes and this like full, the new CEO, the full press release. It is sort of like the moment of like, we're fighting for relevancy, right? It's kind of what it becomes, right? And and I saw some of this at Sun where I was there, and it's sort of like, because like once that decline comes down, you know what I mean? It's like look at Apple at the #1 slot. People write about Apple, and Apple doesn't even say anything, and people are just constantly speculating and pontificating about their strategy.
Yeah.
And then Microsoft is sort of like people are doing that, but they always put it in like the demise category, like it's over, Ballmer's gone, Gates is gone, the computer. And so that's like the whole. It is interesting to watch it, kind of like can someone turn it around? I think the famous quote is like maybe only IBM has like made like 3 different changes in its fundamental business and maintained over this long period of time. History would show that that hey, they're on the decline and we're all just kind of watching, right? You're just kind of sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah. Well, if you really want to like jam down your pants and take a big poop on IBM, there's a book that Robert X. Kringley wrote that's an ebook form that you can read, and it's like, to be honest, it's like not that good, but if you want to be all hater on IBM, that's good background reading for you. And that said, I mean, I'd say 2 things before we wrap up and get to our recommendations, which we forgot last time. But one is like, I've noticed this weird trend over the past few months that like it used to be in the cloud space, people would talk about like Amazon and Rackspace and like maybe some other people, but now it's sort of like someone went into their text expander thing and changed their cloud vendor macro to be Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and every now and then like maybe Rackspace. Like, have you guys noticed that? Like they come up all the time. So it is. And I don't know if this is like pure marketing or actual reality. And also Google I/O was recently in Microsoft's Tech Ed conference, so it's sort of like all these things came to fruition. But there is, at least in the character filled world of hype and chattering stuff, there's this sense of like maybe Microsoft can pull off being a major backend provider, which would be.
I actually. I mean, I don't have solid numbers to back it up, but it definitely feels that way. Where, Microsoft has such a good, they have an immense footprint, and they have a huge channel of people bringing things to them. So there are so many people there are a tremendous number of workloads moving to Azure because people are familiar with those technologies already. And I don't have raw numbers, but I definitely feel like Azure moved into #2 quickly.
Yeah, and then I forgot what the second thing I was going to say is, so I'm going to make up another one. But were you guys in that all hands meeting at BMC where Beecham was there one day and he said, when the stock price is high, everyone's happy and there's no problems. Right? There's another infamous all hands meeting that I won't recount here about bending over and healthcare and stuff. But I think I was thinking like there's that Simon what's his face with his TEDx talk from Portland about you need to answer why, and that's another troubling book to read. That you can read it, but it's very frustrating. Like when you get to the end of it, and it is sort of like, so you could ask the question like, what is so. I say this because the problem for Microsoft that many people like to poke at is like, I don't know what your point of existence is. Like, I don't know what your identity is beyond the obvious like revenue streams that you have. This is some of the criticism that was in that memo is like this. I don't know what you're saying, right? Like, tell me why. Tell me what your why is. And it's interesting to play that back in the other way. That like if you asked Apple what its why was, I'm pretty sure it would sound kind of similar to all this other stuff. But no one really gives them hassle because it's their why is like their stuff is awesome, right? Which is not a why, right? Like it's more of a product that they have, and the issue becomes like to reframe Beecham's thing. If you have awesome product that people like and they're buying, your why is pretty not a big deal, right? Like it's a big deal for you internally, but no one's going to criticize for your why. Like you could say, well, what we do as Apple is we make products that are awesome, and they allow they allow people to be productive in their personal life and maybe their work life. And it's sort of like, and what company doesn't do that?
Well, yeah, no, but you're right though. I mean, everyone in the company needs to be able to have that conversation and say, this is what we do. We are, we're like, and Rackspace actually does that well. It's like fanatical support. We're gonna do whatever you want, and they all drink into that Kool-Aid. But then you have other companies that, like you said, you're like, well, what do you do? And I think somebody pointed that out about Yahoo. They were like, why Yahoo?
Yeah. No. Those are good. Like alongside examples to kind of equivocate and counter what I was saying is I think we discussed it in depth last week, but I think Rackspace is a really good example of a clear defined why that directly goes into everything else, right? Like we discussed this a lot. Like we're really good at having people solve problems for you on computers, right? And we structure everything around that. And then to your point, Yahoo is sort of like I don't know, I have no idea what the point of that company is, other than being a holding company. But anyways, we should wrap up since it's late. I have a recommendation. How about you two? Let's start with Brandon. What's your recommendation of the week?
My recommendation. All right. Well, I once read the book Good to Great, and I hated it. I thought it was awful, and then but I was afraid to say that out loud because everyone loved it. And then I read this new book that someone recommended called The Halo Effect that does a great job at looking at various business books and how business books are created, and really gives you a very thoughtful analysis of why some are good and why some are bad.
Oh, that's right. I heard reference to this somewhere. Huh.
Yeah, and so to your point about, we'll just talk about so we talked about some really good companies or popular companies that are doing well, Google and Apple now. We talked about maybe Yahoo and Microsoft who aren't. And really what he kind of shows is, I'll just make the quick assumption is the quick summary is correlation versus causation. So, when Yahoo is riding high, to your point about the stock price, everything about Yahoo was great because the stock price was up, and then people make these assumptions that hey, the things that are going on there are causing all of that, but in reality, that may just be more correlation. And so it's really insightful, especially I'd sworn off the business book genre a couple years ago. I was like, I'm just never reading another one, and then I read this one, and it really gives you some thoughtful ways. And then, he calls it fallacies about how to think about things, how research is done, and also too just to not fall in that trap. I'll use my own personal experience. The people that started Sun, at one point Sun was I think it was the most valuable company in the world for a very short period of time, or very close. And then of course those same people basically ran it, and it ended up kind of dying out. And I think it's less about maybe what they did, more about a lot of other factors. And and again, back to our press releases conversation to wrap this up is people want business to be really simple. Just do these 5 things and you're going to be successful. Have free lunch, a great culture, and hire great people, and you're going to work. It's going to all work out. But in reality, it's a much more complicated thing. And so this book, I think, if you're in business or you're just interested in that topic, you will certainly enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. How about yourself, Matt?
I got nothing that good.
Well, in situations like this, you can pull from the ephemeral nature of I recommend getting a full night's sleep, which I did recently, and that felt great. So it doesn't have to be an actual object. It's just something that you would encourage people to do.
So here's an insider tip for how to get a full night's sleep. Go on a family vacation in a single room hotel. Because your kid will go to bed at 8, and you have to also.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can. All of us were on vacations recently, I think, and I can vouch for that. It works.
Yeah, I got 10 hours of sleep Friday and Saturday nights because I was on a little family weekend trip.
Wow. Okay. Well, my recommendation is also a book. So every now and then, when I'm not reading some ponderous business book that makes me mash my teeth, I like to find some light, entertaining reading. And I saw that. How do you say his name? You probably know Matt Ray, Neil Gaiman, Gammon, whatever.
Mhm.
He had a new book last year. Yeah, called The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I'm about halfway through reading it. And as one of my friends in Goodreads said, it's not like the mind-blowing book that like American Gods was, but it's a good book. It's nice. It's exactly what you would expect from him.
I think I'll go read American Gods then.
Yeah, The American Gods is a great book. That's fantastic. And the follow-on, Anansi Boys, is good as well. But
Okay.
that American Gods is excellent. All right, well, that's what we got for this week. I believe we're in iTunes if you search for us. And we're definitely at softwaredefinedtalk.com, where you can find a podcast feed and subscribe and all of that. And we'll see everyone next time.
All right. Thanks.